Hi everyone. I'm Devanshu, and I am one of the Android developers in Deque systems. And today I'll be talking about building accessible Android apps with Jetpack Compose. So, if you have been developing Android applications or if you have been following Android's journey, then you might have heard about Jetpack Compose. In this talk, I'll be focusing on how components built in Jetpack Compose behave with Android's accessibility service using really simple examples. And as Android developers, what all we can do to make our Jetpack Compose applications accessible to each and every user. So with that, let's take a look at what we are going to see in this talk. First of all, I'll briefly go over, what is Jetpack Compose, and then, I'll do a bit of a comparison between declarative and imperative type views. When I say declarative, I mean Jetpack Compose, and when I say imperative, I mean XML type of views. And, in the slides, I'll talk more about it. And then a brief overview of how accessibility service in general, how it works on Android, and then with really simple examples built using Jetpack Compose, which I just built. I just created that application for this talk, and I'm really excited to show that. That application has both accessible as well as inaccessible examples. And in the slide, I have code snippets, which will help us in understanding how to make components or composables accessible. And then, a really a kind of a gift to everyone who is listening. Small, really simple tips on how to catch accessibility bugs in your UI. With that, let's get started. So, what is Jetpack Compose? Jetpack Compose is a modern Android user interface toolkit, which can be used to build native Android user interface. It is really fast and it is easier. When I say easier, I mean, it's something like coding simple Kotlin APIs. It's that simple. And since you don't have to put tags, as you can see in the slide, the screenshot on the left has, scroll view tag, and then it has a constraint layout tag, and then it has a text view as a child, things like that. You don't need any of those things with declarative or Jetpack Compose. It's straight away, declare a function in Kotlin and annotate it using a composable. It's that simple. So, faster. Moreover, the things that in my opinion that I love about it is that I can catch UI bugs really easy. Since it's not XML anymore, I don't have to go through each and every line. I just have to follow the pattern. So, and anyways, less code, and who doesn't like that, right? It's something like a dream, right? And then it has built-in support for material design, dark theme, and animation. And moreover, the really good part about this is reusability. So for example, if I am going to use a heading which I'm going to use in many screens in my application, then I can code it just once and I can use it at many places. And it's really simple. It's just one Kotlin file, which I can create at one place and I can use it at many places. It's just one method or just one function that I have to call at multiple places. For example, in this, in the second screenshot that I have in this slide, I have a heading large. All I have to do is to pass the color or the string to the, string is obviously very important. I just have to pass the string and the color of the text which I want for this heading. And there it is. It will be consistent all over the application. Another really good point about this is that if I want to build some really beautiful looking text field, for example, then Compose has done a really good job of providing basic building block of almost all the elements. So in the first screenshot that I have a basic text field. I can use this as a basic building block. And then I can build my beautiful looking text field on top of it. Moving on, what about accessibility? What about accessibility with Jetpack Compose? Now, as I have developed applications more and more on Compose, and in each and every release, I feel like it gives me more power, more flexibility, and less worry of code maintainability and things like that. I feel really powerful, but with great power comes the great responsibility, the responsibility of making our applications accessible for each and every user. Now let's look at in general, right, how accessibility services work on Android. It is, or the accessibility service is something when turned on runs in the background and responds to the accessibility events like click, tap, swipe right, swipe left, or swipe right, swipe top, or swipe bottom, 2-finger swipe, 3-finger swipe, and things like that. So what accessibility service does is that for each and every component on the screen, it literally creates an accessibility tree. It iterates through each and every component on the screen, and it grabs on to the important information that it needs for the accessibility service to behave, to know how to behave on each and every component. Now that information is basically name, role, value, action, or information like whether I should even focus on this particular component or not, and things like that. So that all information is, it literally stores it on a tree. Now this is really important. The last line on this slide is really important, and every time I see a question on Stack Overflow or anywhere else, I always try to put this line forward, which is accessibility services should only be used to assist users with disabilities in using Android devices and applications. There are many times we as Android developers, we want to hack something up, and we simply use the accessibility service to grab some information from some other application. But Android has made it really clear that it should be used for the purpose for which it is built for. Now let's look at how imperative or XML type of user interface interacts with accessibility services in Android. Now, for each and every view in the view hierarchy, or in your whole user interface, the accessibility service, it has to literally extract the information that is like literally going to each element in the view hierarchy and extracting the things which it needs for the accessibility service to know how to behave on every element. So for example, in the screenshot view, and the accessibility grabs on to certain things like the text on it and the bounded screen on it, and if it is important for accessibility or not. For example, if it is not, then it knows that, okay, I don't have to focus on it. Moving on further with Jetpack Compose, how Jetpack Compose interacts with accessibility services in Android. To understand this, it's really important to understand semantics, because semantics literally have changed the whole game of how accessibility services behave. So with semantics are basically the information source for accessibility services. And let it be talkback or switch access. It gathers the accessibility node info. It literally gathers everything from the semantics tree. Now, the semantics does not define information on how a particular composable is drawn on the screen. It is all the information that is required by the accessibility service to know how to behave on that particular element. Now, as we saw that in the imperative type of user interface, accessibility service has to go to each and every element and try to extract what is required by the accessibility node info. But with semantics tree in Jetpack Compose, it's way easier for accessibility service to gather information from, because the semantics tree or the composition hierarchy is already there. So it just has to iterate through it and figure out what the information is. It contains almost everything which is important for the accessibility service to know how to behave. For example, whether there is a click listener or not, whether there is a role attached to it or not, name on it, value of it, and things like that. Now, at this point, Android has done a really, really good job of allowing us as developers to look at the semantics tree. And this when I found this out, I was so happy about it that I don't have to literally go and iterate through the view hierarchy or to the accessibility node info tree to print out each and every information. Now, in the end of this presentation, I'll show you how to do that. Just as a teaser, I'll say that it is possible to do that from the automated tests. Now, before we even look into that, we should understand one thing first, which is merged composition hierarchy and unmerged composition hierarchy. Now, in this slide, on the left, I have a screenshot of a really simple button. It has a name, which is text field examples. Now, if you look or if you observe the code associated to that button, it's really simple. It has a composable button. It has a click listener inside that set for that button. And then it has a text. And that text is also a composable. Now, this button can literally be broken down into two forms of composition hierarchy. One is merged hierarchy. So on the top right screenshot, I have the role button, the text, which is text field examples, and the actions associated to that particular text. If I look at the unmerged composition hierarchy of that, there I see a lot more information, which is there is a button, the role of button, the action associated to it is click, and then exactly how I wrote it in the code, which is the text is the child of the main button. Did it right? So, in certain cases, it is really important to look at the unmerged composition hierarchy because we want to know what is the information that the accessibility service is looking at. And by the way, accessibility service, it literally looks at the merged composition hierarchy. But at the same time, the unmerged composition hierarchy, it helps us to understand what literally is getting merged. So, moving forward, enough of talking, let's see some code. In this particular screenshot, I have a row which I have converted it into a button. Now, with this button, with this row which I have converted into a button, I have attached a click listener, which literally makes it a button. And when TalkBack focuses on this row, it says button, double tap to activate. Now, I can do certain things like this only because it has semantics. And using the semantics, I have set the role. There are many other semantic properties like content description, state description, pop-up, disabled, heading. So for a heading, for example, right? TalkBack uses all the headings and not through each and every component. Then you can mark something or some text as a heading so that it is easier for someone who is using TalkBack to iterate through all the headings. And is pop-up, it's really, really important to mark the pop-ups as pop-ups because that helps the accessibility service to announce something announce a pop-up as a pop-up when it pops up. So at the same time, see, not every time we have to add all the semantic properties one by one. Most of the semantic properties are inherited. For example, in this particular screenshot, I'm using a row, but I if I would have used button, I mean a composable native compose button, then there was no need of providing the semantics or a role. It just comes with it. Now, let's see more examples. Buttons. So this is the application that I created just to demo some accessible as well as inaccessible examples. In the first accessible button, when TalkBack focuses it, it announces accessible button. Double tap to activate. So if you observe the name, role, and action, these three are announced for that button, right? Which makes it really easy for someone who is using TalkBack to understand what can be done with that particular button. Now, if I look at the code, it's really easy. It has a click listener. It has a text as a child, using which I can provide the name for this button. And then I have a modifier. I mean, nothing related to accessibility, but using that modifier, I have constrained this particular button to other elements on the screen. And really, I mean, this totally excites me so much that it's so easy to constrain elements with Compose that it's so wonderful. Anyways, moving forward, let's see a button which is actually not a button if you look at the code, but using Jetpack Compose, wonderful, I can make that a button. Now, I discussed this example, a few slides earlier. This is basically a row which I converted it into a button. I added a modifier and I added a click listener to it. And using that click listener, I assigned it a role, the role of a button. Now, TalkBack behaves exactly the same. It says, whenever it focuses it, it says accessible button, double tap to activate. Now, since we are talking about row, let's see what a row is. Like if I don't make it as a button, just to hack this thing, I did that. But basically a row is something, it's a layout composable that places its children in a horizontal sequence. A column is a layout composable that places its children in a vertical sequence. Now let's look at an inaccessible example of a button. There is a semantics property that Compose allows us to put, which is called invisible to user. In this particular example, the screenshot on the left has the code associated to that inaccessible button. So the button has a click listener and the text inside is also set, which is inaccessible button. And the modifier is set to, the semantics is set to invisible to user. So literally what it does is that when TalkBack navigates from its previous element to this button, it totally skips it. Let me show you this in the example here. So if you see, I have this button example. Now let's try to navigate, and here, now when I swipe right, I am expecting it to go and focus on the inaccessible button, but see what happens. It totally skips it. It skips it because the child text of this button is set to invisible to user. Although for a person who is not using the TalkBack, the experience is same. But for the person who is using TalkBack, the experience is totally different. So, these are the kind of things that we should always take care of. I know, there will be more complex situations when you might have to use invisible to user, but always turning on the TalkBack or, switching on your switch access is always helpful in testing your application. Now let's look at the text field, or in other words, if I say this in the imperative type of user interface building, then this is nothing but an edit text. Now this first edit text is really simple. when the talkback focuses on this edit text, it announces edit box. Enter your name. Double tap to edit. Double tap and hold for more editing options. Now, if you again observe, the name, role, and action are clearly announced by the talkback, right? And someone who is using talkback, they can exactly understand what to do. If I look or if I observe the screenshot on the left of the slide, I can see what all I have done. I have a label, which is the most important part of a text field. Now, I'll take this moment and I want to really appreciate what Android did with this. Earlier, with imperative type of edit text, I had to declare a text view, and then I had to literally assign that text view to an edit text. But with Compose, we can literally put a composable text inside a text field as a label. Now, a very good question should arise. Where is it? It looks like a hint, and where is the label for it, right? Because accessibility guidelines state that there should be a persistent label attached to a text field or an edit text. And guess what? Jetpack Compose has literally taken care of this. And here it is. Whenever we assign a label to it, it acts as a persistent label. So on the screenshot of the application that I have on the right of this slide, I have in the first edit text, I have some text written in it, and if you can see, the enter your name label is still persistent. It doesn't go away, and that is what is required always. Now, there will be situations where you might want to put a trailing or a leading icon in front of your text field. In that particular case, Compose allows you to give a content description for that icon, but it's not totally necessary to put it. I mean, if you choose to put it, make sure that the label is still there, right? I mean, in every case, the label should be there, which makes it totally accessible. In this particular example, if you see, I have this edit box, which has a leading icon, and I have not provided any content description. The talkback announces edit box, email address, double tap to edit, double tap and hold for more editing options. So, literally, I mean, the experience is literally the same. Now, let's look at an inaccessible example of a text field. Now, in this particular example, I have not provided a label for this text field. It looks like in the screenshot on the right of the slide, it looks like that there and the label is name. But Compose has really made it strictly that we have to provide a label to it, and then that label has to be attached to the text field. There is a property in edit text called the merge descendants. Using the merge descendants, what we can do is we can merge two elements together into one parent, and from that parent, the accessibility service, it literally focuses on both the elements at once. So let me show you that. If you see on the screenshot on the right, I have merged the name and the text field together. If I do that, it still makes it inaccessible because in Jetpack Compose, I cannot assign a role of edit text to any element. Now, merging descendants is kind of a magic, I would say. So be very careful when you do that. And again, I'm saying this second time that always turning on your accessibility service like your talkback or switch access, it always helps. Now let's look at switch. This is a really, really interesting example. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say it really honestly, this is the only way I could make it accessible. If anyone who is listening to this talk, if you guys ever encounter something, and if you could make something than this, then please send me messages, send me emails. I'm all ears. So in this particular example, I have the first switch, how the get emails switch is focusing just on the get emails and not on the switch. Now this is accessible. I say that because other examples are inaccessible. So the row the row which is containing the text and the switch, it has the semantic properties, the semantics, and it has merged descendants. Now the text is set to toggleable, and I have cleared the semantics of the switch. It is really, really important to understand that I have cleared the semantics of the switch, and I have assigned the toggleable to the text. What it does is that it makes this whole thing accessible. So let me show you how that happens. Let's go to the switch examples. Now, in here, when I scroll through it, it says on get emails switch, right? And if I double tap it, off. And if I go here, off, get emails switch, double tap to toggle. And in the next example, if you see, I have this get email switch, which is, the idle case, but see what happens. Right? Once I swipe right, it again focuses on the switch. And in the third example, again, first of all, it will look like that. But if you observe really closely, the talkback announces the state on get email off switch. That off condition is the incorrect state of this switch, which makes it inaccessible. Now, again, this is the only way I could make it accessible. Actually, tell me how to make it accessible by focusing both of them, and at the same time, not focus on anything else. Do email me. So, as I was saying, the third example is really interesting. What I did was that I made the parent row toggleable, and I still cleared the semantics of the switch. But then also, when I do that, it just goes and focuses on the switch again. And it says the state of the switch incorrectly. Moving further to checkbox example, checkboxes are really simple. All you have to do is to attach a label, create a row, make it toggleable, and assign the role of that toggleable as a checkbox. Once we do that, we don't even have to clear the semantics of the checkbox. And one very important thing here is that we have to merge the descendants of that particular row. What it does is that it groups the checkbox and the text along with it into one single focusable. So when the talkback focuses on it, it focuses on both the checkbox as well as the text at the same time. So moving further to an inaccessible example of the checkbox, I have merged descendants true, but I did not make the row toggleable. If I do that, then the checkbox is focused again, which makes it inaccessible and really confusing for the person who is using talkback. Now, let's talk about something really wonderful about it, which literally blew my mind when I saw it, which is custom accessibility actions with Jetpack Compose. I know for the people who have done that with the imperative type of views, it would have been a nightmare, right? I mean, you have to write a lot of code, you have to understand how the accessibility service is working, and when an action happens, you may have to override a few things. But this is dream come true for me. I mean, really, literally. So for this example, in the screenshot on the right, I have a news item. It has an image, and just next to the image, I have some text. And then next to the text, I have a favorite toggleable icon. Now, what happens is that when I, as a, I mean, as a normal user, when I click on it, it takes me to the details page. And when I click on it toggles it. But as a talkback user, I want the same functionality. So what I did was that for the double tap of this item, it takes me to the details page. And for the custom accessibility actions, I am toggling the icon. Now, the code for this is literally so small. If you see on the left screenshot, it's just custom actions equals list of custom accessibility action. And literally that is it. Just name the action, whatever you want. So let me show you in the example. Now see, first it reads out the whole description. And then it says double tap to activate actions available. Use swipe up, then right to view. And when I do swipe up, right, and there it is. More actions. When I double click on actions, I see select or unselect bookmark. If I do that, there it is. Right? And let me real quickly show you how we used to do these things with imperative type of views. This is the amount of code that you need. And this is also not the whole code. I mean, it's a lot more things that you have to write to make that possible. Right? So, it's a real good plus. So as I promised that I will show you folks how to print out an unmerged composition hierarchy, and at the same time how to print out merged composition hierarchy. All is to create an automated test, create your compose test rule, and on the root of the compose test rule, you have the option of either using the unmerged tree or the merged tree, and then you can just simply print it in the logs. I mean, believe me, it's gonna help you a lot. All right. So, general tips on how to test your application for any accessibility bugs. As I have stated, 3 times earlier, I'll say that again. Using accessibility services like TalkBack or Switch Access really, really helps. All you have to do is, make your emulator or your device, turn on the TalkBack. For the emulator, now this is a pro tip. You might wonder for emulator, how can I do that? Create an emulator that has Play Store on it. Once you do that, you can go and download Accessibility Suite, Google's Accessibility Suite on it. Once you do that, you will be able to run either Switch Access or TalkBack. It's that easy. And, while testing, just keep one thing in mind. An app's experience should be identical for a non-assistive technology user and an assistive technology user. It's just that simple. I mean, literally, when I started learning, I just used to close my eyes and I used to swipe through the things and try to understand how I would feel, if I am using TalkBack. Now, something, you can also use our library. That is something that we do at Deque. We develop native Android and iOS libraries, which help in detecting and really efficiently catching accessibility bugs in the real-time application. Our main focus with the library is to help our customers to integrate the library with minimum amount of efforts. And our library, the Axe DevTools Android library and the Axe DevTools iOS library, it can be literally integrated with your CI/CD process. And the good news is that we support Jetpack Compose. I mean, uh, you know, I I have to boast about this, right? Like, yeah, we do support Jetpack Compose, and yeah, and implementing the library is as simple as just one line of code. It's just that you import the library and you use axe devtools compose and just passes your compose test rule, and the rest is on us. We do everything else. And at the same time, we provide wonderful user interface where we allow our customers to go through each and every element in the view hierarchy. We have a pretty intuitive front end or the dashboard where you can see a lot more things and a lot more rules and things like that. Other than that, this is what we learned, right? How accessibility service works on Android. We saw how Jetpack Compose behaves with accessibility services, and we saw how imperative type of views work with Jetpack with services, and we saw some tips. We saw really simple examples on which can be used to understand how Jetpack Compose elements behave with accessibility services and what can we do to avoid those things. Now, these bugs, basically, if they are caught really early in the process, they are really easy to fix also. But once the application is all finished and all done, it's really hard to go on each and every screen to understand and fix the accessibility bugs. So, it's always something, which we say shift left technique. We always ask our customers to implement the accessibility libraries right before, right from the point of designers, right? And then the developers take care of it. They either they use assistive technologies to test or they use other libraries to test their applications for any accessibility bugs. So more things to consider, things like screen title, screen orientation. It really matters if we keep the orientation allowed to be rotated. I mean, if the app can be rotated in every direction, it's just wonderful. It really breaks my heart. Many times I am playing a game and I cannot rotate it in a certain direction. It just that feel like the people. Just imagine someone who has a tablet or their phone mounted on a wheelchair and it's set to a particular orientation. How are they gonna use it? The color contrast, it's something we should always take care of. And now Android Studio also has a linter for it, and our library also catches color contrast issues. With that said, I'm all good. Any questions, comments, concerns, tips for me to improve more?
Wonderful presentation. First of all, Devanshu, thank you absolutely so much. For anybody in the audience, Devanshu is a friend of mine. We work together here at Deque, and he is an absolute star when it comes to mobile development. We have quite a few questions in the Q&A here, so I do apologize if we don't get to everything. We're going to try and work through as much as possible, but we got about 10 minutes. Devanshu, the first question that I have here for you is from Robert Henley. He asks, how do you deal with text fields capturing tab characters from external keyboards?
That is a really good question. So with external keyboard, the things are a bit different. The accessibility technology has particular defined views which can capture the views. Now, moreover, the tab part of it, right? The tab part of it is almost similar to how switch access works. So if you actually want to test it, it's really easy to do that. So for example, in my particular setup, what I have done is that I whenever I turn on the switch access, I can it just acts as a tab, really. I mean, what you can do is you can keep on clicking on the tab, or what I do is that I assign the volume keys as the tab, one of the keys as a tab. So testing that is really important, I do agree. But with the tab, what happens from one actionable item to another? I hope I answered that question. But if I do not, my email is always, I mean, it's in the slides. So let me know. I can always get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that answer. One of the other ones here, for the heart icon example, you had the label include select or unselect bookmark. Isn't it best practice to make sure that the state isn't part of the label?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes, it is. But at the same time, that, I mean, I totally agree that the state of that button should be part of it. But at the same time, that example was just to show the custom accessibility actions.
Yeah.
The state of it should be announced along with, if it is selected or selected. I totally agree with that. That's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I thought that was a good question to bring up, because that it kind of raises a topic, which is, while there are capabilities to introduce accessible labels and the key accessibility features to an app, right? That doesn't necessarily make it accessible, right? So there's a level of manual testing and interaction, maybe some user experience or user testing that you can provide with your customers, right? So use the tools that Compose offers, but also include your actual test, your actual audience, and gather feedback from them, right? That'll help you build a better application.
Yeah, literally. And Josh, that's a really good point, because maximum of the accessibility knowledge that I gained was from talking to people. Every time I get a feedback like this, and I really appreciate whoever asked this question. That was a really good point. Well observed.
Yeah, very good stuff. There were a few questions about text. How to make links in text clickable from TalkBack. And also just kind of the idea of links announcing as link available. Is there any way to really fix these issues in Jetpack Compose, make it more accessible or usable?
Yeah, so with Jetpack Compose, really, I mean, the good part is that if you provide through the semantics, if you provide, or if you set something if you set a click listener to something, that will work. So, I mean, my creative solution for this is to create a column. Create a column and then keep adding more rows to it. So by that, what I mean is that you'll have a bunch of children inside a particular column, and then you'll have a particular row which will be actually clickable. And that will make the talkback or any accessibility service focus on it particularly, and then it will announce the text as well as it will announce the action associated to it. So really good question. But with Jetpack Compose, I'm sure that it is possible.
Absolutely. All right, here's another question. The accessible toggle didn't work with TalkBack the same way as the current toggles in the Android settings menu. Is this a change caused by Jetpack Compose?
By toggles, is it the switch? I'm assuming that it's a switch. So the switch It's a switch.
Yeah, I'm going to assume switch probably.
Okay. Yeah. So for a switch, 100%. So as I said, I was able to make that accessible in one particular situation, but there may be some others. And that being said, the state of the switch is really important. Someone mentioned just a while ago that the state of that toggleable heart icon should have been announced, and I totally agree with that. And the same thing applies with the switch also, right? At the same time, have changed, and they have changed, from my point of view, they have changed in a good way. And making something accessible is really easier with Jetpack Compose, because really you have access to all the semantics. You can literally put the state of something. For example, for a toggleable switch, what you can do is you can set the toggleable state to the one which you want. Now, I know that there used to be a problem with the imperative type, or the old type of, the XML type of views, where the state used to persist, and you had to literally go and change it. So that part is actually solved with Jetpack Compose. So good question, anyways. I mean, it was a good one.
Yeah, I agree. That was a very good one. All right, let's see. Do you have any open source projects demonstrating accessible practices that you would suggest in Jetpack Compose?
For Jetpack Compose, we are actually trying for an open source project, but at the same time, there are many examples by Google. I think there is an example, an open source app called Crane. Crane is a good example where you can really find automated tests, like how to write automated tests, and also real good of semantics actually. That's all, like in this beginning phase of Jetpack Compose, that's all we want to focus on from the accessibility point of view, that how semantics are working, how different permutation and combination of Jetpack Compose are gonna affect something. And also there is, I think there is a Sunflower app, which is a mixture of the XML type of views, as well as the declarative or the Jetpack Compose type of a view. So that is also like pretty interesting one if you want to try out.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. All right, we got, I think, time for one more question. So Robert Henley asks, how do you deal with the fact that semantics.toggleable used in your checkbox example does not support keyboard toggling?
Does not support the keyboard toggling. Yeah, actually, that is a good point, which is, usually with the talkback users or the check or the switch access users, these things are pretty consistent. The problem with the keyboard user with the keyboards or many more other devices is that they are pretty inconsistent. So there are points where things behave a bit differently, which I totally agree that they should not, but there are bits and pieces which still have to be improved, but really good start for something which actually addresses a lot of accessibility problems. And for that particular checkbox example, I agree that I showed an example which was a very a straight away and a textbook example, but really keeping it in a row, with keeping a row and then putting in two children along with it, and then assigning, just making something that the text is also announced along with that checkbox, since there are no labels attached to it. That is the important part.
Excellent. Well, everyone, we are out of time. Devanshu, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. I'd also like to say thank you to Chris and Whitney for the ASL interpretation. You guys have been great, and we are so thrilled you're here.
Thank you. Thank you, folks.